Stephanie! Help! Well, do what you want to do. Let's get it on.
Directed by Eric Huckington and PJ Sparks, we are talking New Fear's Eve. And this is a horror comedy from 2025. Of course, the perfect time to review a New Year's Eve horror is in February. So let's go. This one stars Felissa and Dave Sheridan, or at least they are the kind of the named actors here. They are not the major players in regards to characters, however. Now, the story focuses on a group of workers from a kind of office type company. It's clear this movie has influenced from movies like Clerks and shows like The Office. And we follow a variety of kind of workers, up from the lowly employees up to the boss, played by Sheridan. And there seems to be a masked serial killer who resembles a kind of plague doctor, has been going around this area killing a variety of people, and has now got his sights set on this kind of office party with all the employees. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's talk about it. Now, this is very comedic. This is a horror comedy with a capital C for comedy. So this is largely going to depend on your sense of humour and what you find funny, because it really leans into that comedy. It's not like a horror movie with comedic elements. It is a proper silly movie in many ways. And I think that's kind of the best way to describe the humour here, is a kind of silly humour. As I've mentioned, I think the movie is trying to kind of be somewhat reverential with shows like The Office, movies like Clerks, but also having lots of kind of name drops of different kind of horror movies as well. Possibly a little bit too self-referential, one might say, but obviously it's kind of its influences are kind of clear here. But the actual kind of style of the humour is, for the most part, sort of lots of dialogue-driven kind of jokes about sex, farts, dicks, things like this. Some kind of like genre-based humour as well. A little bit of meta humour. But it's very kind of, as I say, juvenile. So humour is subjective, so we have to kind of bear that in mind. This is also a lower budget movie. So let's talk about what I think works in this movie's favour. Now, if this humour speaks to you, you may find this movie hilarious. Now, it's not like the humour is good or bad, because it is going to be down to people's opinion. But I would say it's somewhat consistent. So if you are a fan of this juvenile, almost slapstick kind of humour, you may enjoy this. But that will also come with the flip side of that coin. What I would say that I think genuinely works in, unequivocally, is this is a movie, if you like kind of inventive kills, high body counts, this movie delivers on that. Because this has got one of the highest body counts I remember seeing in recent years from a kind of a slasher perspective. The movie starts with a kind of a montage of kind of different kills and using a variety of different implements, achieved practically. And it's not like a film where the gore is especially realistic, and it's that sort of tongue-in-cheek sort of style of horror. But I think that would definitely apply. It kind of feels like a 90s style slasher in some respects. Maybe not quite as this has more humour than those potentially, but nonetheless, it definitely sort of feels like a 90s stylistic choices in some ways. You obviously maybe Scream is another influence here. But yeah, there is a lot of kills here. Some of them are more inventive than others. Some of them are, just throats being slashed. But there are some. And there's one scene, for example, where I feel it hit a little bit hard. There's a scene where we have these two cops going into this kind of warehouse where it looks like there's been sort of like Saw-style traps that these cops unwittingly activate, and it ultimately kills a bunch of people that have been detained. And that was the one sort of sequence where I feel the movie took itself a little more seriously, and the kills felt a little bit more kind of serious. And that scene, for example, I think is done pretty well, and it's pretty harsh to watch. It's the harshest scene in the film, but even so, it's still not massively explicit. But you know, that scene certainly hit. The majority of the kills are plentiful. They're bloody. They're practically realised. Some of them are kind of like are quite sort of gross out. Some of them are kind of played for laughs, like, you know, we get a guy impaled through the eye socket with a dildo and things like this. So, you know, there's a big variety here. So if you like plenty of kills, then this may be the movie for you, let me tell you. There are some obviously recognisable faces here. Felissa Rose probably being the biggest one here. But I really like Dave Sheridan. I think he's actually quite a funny actor. I quite enjoy him. It's a little bit on the sillier side for me personally, the humour here, but there are still some kind of some kind of fun scenes you know, you can kind of enjoy. And there's a few other kind of genre faces from kind of B movies and stuff. If you're an avid B movie fan, you'll kind of recognise from a few different kind of properties here and there as well. So, you know, you'll have fun with some of the kind of the genre faces, and as I say, there's some of the references. And there's some kind of deep cuts in some of these kind of references as well. So this is definitely a movie made for, I think, a sort of specific type of audience. There is some interesting ideas that are introduced, although I don't think they are, again, this is going to factor into the negatives, but they, for example, there's a suggestion here that this killer has some type of deal going with the police. Well, that's an interesting wrinkle, you know. That's gonna factor into the negative. So, but yeah, there's some interesting stuff introduced. There is a little bit of kind of subverting expectations of some of these kind of like love relationships. You know, we've got potential love triangles and things, and I know that might sound like, oh, I don't want to watch anything like that. But yeah, there's some stuff here which I think, you know, I think actually is done fairly well. For example, we have one of our main male characters is in a relationship with someone who's like a workaholic, she's like a nurse or something, and there may be a kind of unrequited love with someone else, but he genuinely kind of quite likes his girlfriend, and his girlfriend, although seemingly always at work, seems to like him. So, you know, again, some of it is doesn't play out exactly necessarily how you might think in some of these kind of smaller little kind of elements here. The movie's also kind of punctuated with a variety of kills. It doesn't just kind of save it up for until the end. They are peppered through the movie, so you're not having to wait particularly long until this killer strikes again. And the killer is very distinctive, albeit I think it's a little impractical, if I'm honest. So let's talk about what doesn't work. And let's as we mentioned the killer, let's talk about him again. This costume, I think, is a little on the goofy side, I have to say. I don't think it looks particularly threatening. It kind of looks like a cartoon character made into live action, and he's got this huge headpiece on that is just impractical. You know, you could, as a victim, you could just turn this guy's helmet and he wouldn't be able to see. You know, it's massively impractical. And I know this is not a movie that's taking itself particularly kind of serious, but it's just kind of silly looking, I have to say. And they have set a few things up with the killer. You know, potentially sort of saying he's in a medical profession, but it's never really explored other than just kind of setting things up. And as I've mentioned, there's a kind of it almost sets up this subplot where the killer appears to be in cahoots with at least some of the police. But that storyline is dropped and it's never to be seen again. And it's like, well, why bother setting that up? Why have these scenes that seem to suggest that there's some type of collusion with the police, only to it to go literally nowhere? So this movie feels to me like it has been chopped up in post and things have been edited and rearranged So there are certain things here that are added that just don't really feel like they kind of make a lot of sense. There is a lot of supporting characters in this movie, a lot. And this movie does have a high body count, but it's so scattershot in regards to, I think, everyone's wearing these like the same kind of like uniforms and stuff. A lot of the people kind of look kind of quite similar, you know, bearded, glasses, brown hair. It's kind of not great, you know, they kind of blend in a little bit. The movie is very, very focused in trying to have this kind of quippy dialogue. I think the writer, and I know PJ Sparks is one of the writers here, I think fancies himself as a bit of a kind of Kevin Smith / Tarantino style writer of dialogue here. Not really. I think the problem is that a lot of the kind of the writing, the characters act very similar. There's no, even though we have some interesting elements, like I say, maybe it's a little bit to do with the kind of the relationship, the love angles and stuff. I think it's done relatively well. Everyone here has a very sort of similar style of humour. So everyone kind of just seems like variations of the same person. Also, as we're talking about the humour, it is very, very silly, very juvenile, and not very smart, I have to say. There's a couple of, as I say, like meta jokes that is sprinkled in, but for the most part, it is just sort of sex jokes and stuff, and it's like they're funny, you know, once in a while, I would say. And again, it is down to somewhat of a personal preference. But you know, the dialogue isn't as clever as I think this filmmakers think it is, and as such, just comes across as trying too hard sometimes. It doesn't help as well. The delivery from the actors, I've got to be honest with you, for the most part, is quite poor. You've got veteran actors in here, Dave Sheridan, Felissa, as I've mentioned, and you know, maybe one or two others do okay. And although this movie is clearly a tongue-in-cheek movie, it's not trying to be a dramatic movie, it's not trying to win awards for acting. Some of the acting choices and just the kind of the delivery is so stilted and cheesy. Even for a horror comedy, it comes across as eye-rollingly bad at times. Now, I think you can kind of have some buffer when you can lean so much into the comedy to the way you could expect maybe the acting to be not quite as on par as maybe it would be if had the movie lent into more of a dramatic fashion. But it is quite bad at times, quite bad. And as I mentioned, more on a taste thing, the humour is not going to be for everyone. I personally didn't find this particularly funny. I'm not going to mark the movie down because I necessarily didn't think the jokes were funny, but I would say the humour is kind of like not particularly varied. As I say, it's all very much just one sort of style of joke. And the characters are all too sort of goofy for their own good at times, because you never really feel any type of genuine connection. It's this hair's breadth away from being like a parody movie at times. There's maybe too many characters. We never really feel like we get to know anyone. You know, plot points seem to be introduced, but nothing is really done with them. I mean, I kind of quite like the fact that this guy is in a happy relationship with his girlfriend that's a workaholic, but then again, nothing really pays off for that, to be honest. We see her at the hospital, and I thought there was going to be some type of scene towards the end that may have paid it off. No. So it just seems this movie is a little bit of a mess overall. But that being said, if you just want to watch loads of kills, lots of inventive deaths and things, and there's somewhat of an over the top nature to it, this movie would have an element of fun for some people. So it really, for me, is kind of somewhat middle of the road. It doesn't really stand out, but I think some people may enjoy it. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What are your thoughts? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.